I know the first question on a lot of y'all's mind, who the hell is this guy who's about to tell me about Jane Eyre? So I think a little brief introduction is probably in order. My name is Ben, and there are three things that I love more than anything else in the world: an ice cold Michelob Ultra, world wrestling entertainment, and mid-19th century Victorian English novels centering on upper-class people taking extended walks in parks while discussing important philosophical matters in life. In other words, like ogres, like onions, I contain layers. And a lot of people have an issue with it. They say, Ben, if you're going to talk about books, if you're going to talk about Jane Eyre, why don't you take up the cashmere and the gold-plated Harry Potter spectacles and talk about it like a proper book reviewer? What I say is I want to talk about things my way, and my opinions may not line up with yours, and that's good. If you agree with them, please leave a like and comment. If you disagree, also please leave a like because I'm craving your validation, but also comment why you disagree and we'll talk about it. I just am going to tell it like it is. I'm going to tell you my opinion because I'm so excited to talk about this book. It's one of my absolute favorites of all time, and I want to prove to you guys, no, book reviewers do not come in one type. So first of all, I wanted to get into the characters a little bit. Number one, the protagonist, Jane Eyre. What makes Jane such a special character to me is that in so many of these sort of like feministy media things, whether it's books or movies or whatever, you have an iconoclastic female lead who is independent, right? She marches to the beat of her own drum. She doesn't let people tell her what to do, but she's also a baddie. Like, look at Rey from Star Wars, for example. Damn. Look at Captain Marvel. Okay, and if they're not baddies, a lot of times they're very wealthy, right? And so, yes, a lot of times they are pushing people sort of to reevaluate their preconceived notions about what a woman is, but their ideas are sort of received more like, well, like she's wrong, but like maybe I'll think about it. It's almost endearing, her independence, right? What is notable about Jane Eyre is that she's not a baddie. In fact, the book makes that abundantly clear. She's described as plain and thin and nothing spectacular in the looks department. It's almost insulting how often people say that she's ugly. Okay, she's also very low class from the very beginning of this book. I mean, she is an orphan, kind of on the most marginalized plane of her society of the time. And so actually they mention that she has an older sister who kind of misbehaves and is kind of independent, but she's very beautiful, right? So people sort of let it go. Jane is neither beautiful or wealthy, and so people don't let it go. And I think that's what makes her such a mold-breaking protagonist still to this day, right? Is that she is just kind of getting by on her intellect and is very independent, despite the fact that her society keeps on whacking her on the wrist and saying, don't be independent. You know, you're not in the position where you can be, okay? The next character I want to talk about is Mr. Edward Rochester. And this is where I'm going to tell it like it is and people aren't going to like it. To be very honest with you, by the end of this book, big qualifier, by the end, I really did kind of like Mr. Rochester. I know people do not like the guy, and okay, granted, he has no game. If I had to like read another sentence of Rochester, oh my pet, my fairy, oh my god, okay, it's so frustrating and really sort of just gross when you remember that he's like 20 years older than her or whatever. And a lot of people are like, did he groom her? Okay, maybe by our standards, sort of, kinda. I'm not going to open that can of worms, right? I feel like maybe, whatever, not going to talk about it. The bottom line, though, is I think Rochester, sort of brings in this really important point about relationships because I think he loves Jane in his own way from the very beginning. Just imagine life from this guy's perspective. He married an insane woman, and it's so bad that he has to lock her in his attic. Again, another thing I don't need to talk about with a modern lens. Let's just suffice to say that she's violent, she's insane, she's made his life very difficult. And he sees it as I've had to suffer and sacrifice so much, and now, boom, this wonderful woman who understands me, she respects me, we, have this instant connection, she's come in my life, and this is my reward for all of the suffering. In other words, he sees Jane more like an ideal archetype than an individual actualized human being. And I think, again, it's not necessarily his fault, but that is his major flaw from the beginning. His sort of secondary flaw is that the only way that he sort of has of expressing his love, and I think it's very indicative of the society of the time, is gifts, right? He says, Jane, bust out the pearls. Jane, put on this nice wedding gown. Jane, I'm going to parade you all around and everybody's going to see how beautiful you are. Okay, but Jane really is actually uncomfortable with that, because what Rochester sees as giving his affection through gifts, Jane sees as him asserting his power, prestige, and privilege, and drawing attention to the fact of how unbalanced their power and wealth dynamics are. In other words, Jane doesn't want to be a prize that is put on a pedestal. She wants to be a fully actualized human being who, yes, serves Rochester in a sense, but also somebody who Rochester depends on, not just an ornament, okay? And I think we'll get back to that when we discuss more themes and messages at the end of this video, but I think that's a notable thing about Rochester and why him becoming ironically disabled in the end of the book was very important. Really what the book is saying, this is the only way they could have had an egalitarian marriage where Jane would have been satisfied. Jane needed Rochester to literally be knocked down like 5 pegs so that he'd be equivalent to a woman of the time, and they could have a marriage where they both count on each other and serve each other, and it's not this unbalanced dynamic. I think that says a lot. The final character I want to really discuss is St. John Rivers. Okay, I think that this guy is really sort of under-discussed and oversimplified, in large part because he's a very unlikable character, probably the most in the book. Now, I think it's a close competition between him and Jane Eyre's adopted mother, right? But he is not likable. He is, yes, I think objectively emotionally abusive. Being like, you're going to go to hell if you don't marry me, by the way. Yeah, kind of a dick move. And like Rochester was creepy. This guy's just mean. Like, he's not nice to people. But I kind of take Jane's side, when she says, this guy, yes, is cold. He's sort of heartless. But he does kind of a great thing in that, he could have been a very comfortable aristocrat who marries an aristocrat's daughter, lives in the village where he grew up in, has his prestige and position in, and instead he decides to sacrifice it all, deny himself, and submit to a higher ideal. And I think Jane really respects that, because that's how Jane is also. Jane, from the very beginning, when Rochester proposes to her the first time, she doesn't reject that proposal on the basis of, I don't want to be attached to you, I want to be independent. Now that's part of it. But the central part is that she says, I owe something to something that is higher than me and higher than you. God, okay? I cannot live as a married man's mistress. It's just not acceptable. And so she makes a huge sacrifice to serve this sort of transcendental ideal. Then when St. John comes to her and says, again, like, you're going to have to join with me in marriage so that, our two wills can join, and under my leadership, we serve God. She says, no. I want to serve God as an equal. I want to serve God in my own way, in my own capacity. I want that choice to submit to be free, not to be mediated through you, right? So again, Jane, like St. John, I think, has a real sort of servant mentality, but she recognizes that, control and voluntary service are very different things. And I think what this book and what makes it so special and nuanced is that it's a real critique of control. It's a critique of marriage as a means of control, wealth as a means of control, and religion as a means of control. But it is not saying that the answer to all of this is just like belligerent individualism. What it's saying is the answer to it is serving on your own terms. Everybody should be free to discover how they best serve and what they should serve, and then to do that, to willingly submit themselves. And I think to further support that interpretation, when Jane returns to Rochester, she is submitting to his service to maintain his health, right? But she's happy to do that, right? And Rochester's now happy to sort of be dependent in a way. And I think that by ending the book, just to discuss ending a little bit, it's so special in that the obvious way to end it would be having Jane and Rochester, they get married, it's awesome, they have their kid, they live happily ever after. The last page, though, focuses on St. John's imminent demise in India. He's about to die of some illness. To me, the sort of language that he used, his sort of joyful resignation to meet his Savior, it's very similar to Helen Burns's response to her death of illness. You know, Helen Burns was Jane's best friend back at Lowood, and Jane is very blown away by this woman is about to die. You know, like she just has such tremendous faith though. She sees like this world has its place, but you know, regardless of this adversity, there's much more important things, right? And it's the same thing with St. John. I think that the moral of this story is that there is something transcending this broken society. And, you know, the society does need to be fixed and modified so that people can more freely pursue the service of that transcendental good. And again, what that service looks like, what the greatness looks like depending on the individual is very different. Okay, for Jane, it's serving Mr. Rochester and supporting him. For, you know, St. John, it's serving a transcendental ideal and advancing humanity generally, because a man like St. John, while capable of, you know, goodness, is not capable of interpersonal kindness. But I think Jane is saying that's okay, because the world needs people like him, and frankly, the world needs people like me. The world needs people like all of us. That to me is why this book is so empowering across the board. Whoever you are, this message resonates. Whatever your gifts, find them, and then find your goal, and then serve it, and make some difference in the world. I think this is what the book comes down to. And while it is a sharp social critique, it can be a little bit negative at times. I don't think it's ever pessimistic. I don't think that it's particularly cynical, and that's why it endures so much. Overall, I want to rate this book a 100 million out of 10. Thank you very much. My name is Ben.